Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are excited to be joined by Livi McKay, founder and executive chairwoman of Discover Your Color. We're excited to spend some time talking a little bit more about Discover Your Color and, of course, what is going on in the cannabis space as it continues to evolve in 2025. So one, if you're out there, we appreciate you joining, of course. And two, if you have any questions, comments, you're always welcome to put them in the chat. And also feel free to give this video a like. Always want to throw that out there as well as we're going along. With all that said, Livi, thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. Wanted to start. I feel like a lot of these start with just sort of like background and history, just because it's your first time on. Would love to start with kind of your story, your background, and kind of, the path to getting here.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I appreciate being here, and I'll do my best to try and keep it brief, even though it can be a long story. But it starts with me being from Alabama and not pro cannabis in any shape, form, or fashion. From a conservative household, and I did not appreciate it really until I got to college, where many minds open up, but did not appreciate its true medicinal therapeutic value until I was in a F5 tornado back in Alabama in 2011. I lost my car, my apartment was condemned, and a few weeks later I started having grand mal seizures. And that started to really wreck my life in a sense. And I was on all the medications weren't working. And then I ended up using a daily regimen of cannabis flower. This is before CBD was really widespread, or it was on the fringes of treating this for seizures. But I started using cannabis flower as well as a holistic diet and some, and therapy and so forth. And the seizures dissipated. Had to take a year off from school, but was able to go back, get a degree, and then went into banking and finance. And then a few years later, I then had another series of even more severe health conditions where this was around when I was between 24, 25, working at Morgan Stanley. I started to have a series of problems, and which resulted in 17 hospitalizations in 15 months with 5 major operations and the removal of almost all non-vital organs except for my spleen. Still have my spleen. And that, though, resulted in a lot of other chronic issues, including chronic pain. They put me on roughly almost a dozen medications, including around 90 opioids a month, benzodiazepines for sleep. I mean, you name it, I was pretty much on it. Had a pharmacy in my purse. Had to resign from Morgan. Seizures came back. Basically declared an invalid at 25, and people were wondering if I would make it to 30 as like a consolation prize kind of a thing. Truly, I was very, very sick. But by the 17th hospitalization, which was roughly a month long, I had 2 month-long-ish hospitalizations, but the 17th was a month long. And I'd been on IV Dilaudid, which is essentially akin to heroin. It's more potent than morphine. I don't know by how much, but I know it's a lot more. And I was on a very high dose of Dilaudid every 3 hours. So when I got out of the hospital, something in me snapped. That's the only way I can really describe it. That I just said, I'm either going to die or something's going to change, and I'm not going to be hooked on the drugs anymore, specifically the opioids. So I got a whiteboard. I still have a picture of the whiteboard, but I got a whiteboard, wrote out my medications, wrote out the times, got myself an ounce of cannabis flower, and put myself into withdrawals, used cannabis to blunt the withdrawals, and got off of the Dilaudid in 10 days. After being on it for 4 weeks in the hospital IV. I don't recommend that. It was really brutal and really aggressive and not a safe way to do it. But like I said, something in me snapped, and I just needed to get off of this. And then over the next preceding 2 to 3 years, I got off of all of the medications except for hormone replacement, which I have because I don't have the organs to produce it. But other than that, I'm off of all of it. Got back to Wall Street, had a pretty good career in Wall Street, and more on the investor relations, business development side of life. But truly, my whole motivation of going into finance and Wall Street, I fully disclosed this, was to pay for my horse habit. Obsession is probably more accurate term. And so
they're expensive, yeah.
They are expensive. And that was quite, and so in 2019, I actually became ranked 5th in the country in my division in 3-day eventing, which is like triathlon of horses. And that was kind of a childhood dream of mine to get to this certain level and to compete at it. And unfortunately, my horse died in a pasture accident, and I had some insurance money out of it. And I had, like I said, had a good career on Wall Street, but also had this moment of, I don't really like finance that much just as a career. And I went into it with full disclosure that I loved horses and I loved people, but I wanted to do something more. And I really wanted to figure out how to serve other people, not just myself, because I felt like I did that with the horse school. And that was really turning my eyes towards the cannabis community, because I wanted to figure out, how did one plant replace all of these medications from a physiological perspective, from a botanical perspective, and from a physiological perspective. And so that's what, long and short of it, that's actually what led me to Tulsi Gabbard, doing a town hall with her, and then a podcast. And then we became friends, and she started to kind of mentor me and in and around policy, in and around media, in and around how to get movements started, and to really focus this on people, on the people that this helps the most, the consumer. I call them patient consumers, and we can get to that in a little bit, but really focusing it on those people. And then that's what led me to leaving Wall Street in 2020, and not really knowing what I was going to do, but I wanted to solve a problem. That was the motivation, if you will, was to solve, okay, how do we get the right products to the right people, and how do we reframe the entire cannabis narrative around what I believe it truly is, which is people helping people. And that's what led to the founding of Discover Your Color and the platform that we have today. And we can get into that a little bit, but I'll just want to give you a second to not ramble on for 7 minutes, but yes, give you a chance to pitch in.
No,
here.
I think that's great. I do want to get into Discover Your Color in a little more depth, but yeah, I think just, reflecting on that story, I think it is interesting, just because I think a lot of people know people in their lives who have been affected and have used cannabis, I think, for medicinal purposes to try to help them, for a range of things. I think obviously some things that are more extreme, like seizures, or even honestly some things that affect people day to day, whether it's anxiety or, sleep, all those things, soreness. So I think it's one of those things where a lot of people have experienced some level of connection to cannabis as a medicine, but I think going through it directly yourself has to be obviously, a big impact in your life. And I can see obviously why you try to bring that to other people. I do think it's interesting also, just with your specific story, it does kind of have that intersection of, the conversation around opioids and cannabis. And I know there's been a lot of research lately in terms of cannabis kind of helping, you get off of opioids. I don't think anyone would recommend probably in the course that you did, which is that's very cool to try to, say it's kind of do or die, and I'm going to do this, and that's the way to do it. But yeah, it does seem like there is more of that conversation happening. Do you have any sort of like extra thoughts on sort of how cannabis is being positioned against opioids in terms of trying to give that to people?
And what do you mean by against opioids?
I feel like in terms of some of the push for the cannabis conversation currently is sort of, there are a lot of ways. I think some people want it for recreation. I think some people just want it for, more basic, I think, things. Some people want it against, illicit grows. Some people want it for that opioid element, just because that opioid epidemic is so large, I think, here in the US.
Yes. And so, thank you for that. I do think that, not just, I think I'm more of the rule than the exception.
Sure.
Because while my story might be pretty sensational in a lot of ways, we've got tornadoes and, multiple hospitalizations and all of that. I have found that there are hundreds, thousands, if not millions of people with a similar story on variating on the spectrum.
Sure.
And so whether that is, like you said, with opioids is a big one, like you said, and we mentioned a little bit before the call, with veterans, it's a huge demand to not be on opioids, because what a lot of people realize when they take opioids is that it masks the problem. It doesn't actually help you deal with it. I know for me, it ended up causing more pain because it caused a lot of gut issues, and I don't have the and I'm missing organs around, I'm missing gallbladder. So that created even more issues and so forth. So it's not really dealing with the pain, and it's more creating more problems. And I think outside of, also, you could take too many and die, which is obviously a very big problem. Whereas with cannabis, and I think most people feel this way, it does not, it helps with the pain, but more than anything, it helps deal with the pain. And it also helps with a holistic approach to things like chronic pain. Cannabis is not a silver bullet. It's not going to be that pill that you take and it just makes you better. That's, frankly, that's kind of a lot of what's wrong with our healthcare system, is that we think this way.
Sure.
It's a tool to help you. Cannabis is a tool to help you with a more holistic style, a more holistic approach, including, that's why you look at cannabis users on average have lower BMI. It's if you don't come to cannabis as a wellness person, you usually leave as one, or you become one. And because it helps to open your mind to that. And so this is an entirely, when we say this is paradigm shifting, that word gets thrown around a lot and kind of becomes a buzzword. So I try to avoid it. But when we start to understand the chemistry behind cannabis, and that it is different from an FDA framework of multi-agent versus single agent, our science people will know about that. But more so, it encourages, again, that holistic approach to your health, where if you solve your pain problems, a lot of times you solve your sleep problems. And if you solve your sleep problems, then you solve your anxiety problems. And so it's understanding this, rather than, okay, you've got a sleep problem, let's give you a pill for that. You've got an anxiety problem, let's give you a pill for that. You've got a pain problem, let's give you a pill for that. And again, cannabis is that tool to that approach. And a lot of people, so our medical system is very disempowering. It truly is. You go in, you have to rely on the doctor, you have to rely on the insurance, you have to rely, and so on and so forth, where cannabis is very empowering. It's an ability to take your health back into your own hands with guidance from people that are knowing, but really it's such, and this is because it's safer than experimenting with all of these other things, that it is empowering. And it isn't, and I believe that is why people feel, especially the consumer patients, feel so strongly about it, and why there's such a community. I mean, 24% of Americans are using cannabis in some way, and flower is still the most popular by far. If ever we see flower dropping off, we see pre-rolls being the next ones. We're like, that's the same thing, guys. So flower continues to be the same, and we're still understanding the science around it. We're still understanding why. A lot of it has to do with rapid onset and dose control. That's why people like flower. And which is really important for something like pain and opioids, right? You want to be able to control that dose, and you also want it to be rapid onset. If you're in pain, you don't want to wait around, or you don't want to have to build this up. You want that alleviated. So this is, it fits in many, many places, but it's important to know that it's not the silver bullet. It's a tool that helps and bring about the whole healing.
Yes, I think that's a great point. And kind of the 2 points that you touched on that I think are important to echo are sort of the element that you're not taking things that might have, make things worse for you later on, whether that's addiction or whether that's causing separate problems because you're on a ton of different opioids or things like that. So I think stemming those negative consequences while you're managing pain is important. But like you're saying, cannabis has been around for a long time. There's a lot of people who are using it, but I think there's still more education, sort of more kind of fine tuning that's coming along, whether it's on the producing side for trying to find the right size pre-rolls, the right sort of strain mixes, all those things. So that kind of comes through, which is, I think, both great points. So maybe that's a great kind of segue. I would love to kind of talk a little bit more about Discover Your Color. I know you founded it. We talked very briefly, high level about it, but would love to kind of get that quick snapshot in terms of, in simple terms for people, what is Discover Your Color?
Very simply put, it's getting the right products to the right people without over promising and under delivering, which is the issue right now. So what Discover, I should say how it was born, again, was out of my frustration of having to become an amateur botanist, pharmacologist, and everything else just to understand what I was buying. And I said that no one else should have to do this. This should be a lot more clear. And so that led to me partnering up with a doctor out of California who has been treating patients in the cannabis space since 1998. And he's been studying the flower and the chemistry with others since 2015 has been published. And so where this all was founded from was going, okay, First, we have to understand that the classification system that we have for cannabis right now doesn't work. And the classification system that we use is indica, sativa, hybrid. If you've been in this or even been around that, you've heard those terms. Indica being sedating, sativa being energizing, hybrid being somewhere in between. Now, we know from study after study, experience everywhere along, that everyone knows this is highly flawed. It's even a 69% chance that you're going to get the opposite. You're going to get a different intended effect than what's labeled. And that's because no one really knows how to classify it. It sort of came out how the phenotype, how the plant looked, was originally where these classifications came from. And I'm oversimplifying, but this is just for layman's terms, that's where this came from. And then it loosely tied to the effect. And so what we did is, and what our team did and it started with the doctors, and then when we came together, is they went to the community that had been and when I say the community, the legacy community that has been in the game for generations, some second, third generation cultivators, and said, how do you separate the flower? And they said, we smell it. We do it by aroma. And so then what we were able to do was then they grouped the aromas, and then they were able to go in and look at the chemistry behind each aroma. And that chemistry behind each aroma turned out to be unique. And we were able to identify those unique markers. And then we were able to take that chemistry, they were able to take that chemistry cluster, because it's before we met, they were able to take those chemistry clusters and overlay those with top reported effects. And so then we were able to get somewhat of an idea of what chemistry clusters would be the most energizing and what chemistry clusters would be the most sedating for the majority of people, not everybody. And so that's why we named the system Discover Your Color. So the colors are yellow, green, blue, and purple. Intuitive to mean the brighter colors are your more energizing, the sedating, the cooler colors are your more sedating. However, yellow, which full disclosure is my least favorite color. Oh, lots of people like yellows. So my husband being one of them. So I'm not here to discredit the yellows. I'm just saying it's not mine. But if you are someone that's looking for sleep, let's just give you this example. If you're looking for sleep and blues and purples don't put you to sleep, you might be in that category where yellows do put you to sleep. You can then reliably go back to a yellow coated color for that effect, because you've now found the chemistry, because remember, it's just color coding chemistry. You've now found the chemistry that matches with you. And so this is providing, instead of going, this is definitely going to make you sleep, we're able to have a more honest conversation with consumers as they come in and also create that stickiness of going, hey, this is what works for most people. And if it works for you, great. You can come back and keep reliably buying those colors, and you'll get that report. You'll get that consistent effect. But if it doesn't, come back. We can work down the spectrum and we'll find that fit for you. And where we've rolled this out, we found that first off, they were attracted to the colors, especially when it wasn't blended in with the brands. When they saw that this stuck out in the retailers immediately, that brought people's attention. Color means something. So what does it mean? Then that invites a bud tender conversation. Then we also found that, and these are limited results, I want to be very clear, that these are limited results, but we did find that roughly 90% of consumers, once they found their color or colors, that's it. They were done. They would shop around in those colors because there is variety within the colors, but they would stay to that color for one reason or another. One guy he had headaches from a lot of different, until he found a color that didn't give him headaches. And so he stayed with the color that didn't give him headaches. So this has been a way also to simplify the conversation between cultivators, retailers, and consumers. Get everyone speaking on a very simplified language that represents something very objective and scientific and concrete, but in a way that everyone can understand. And what we found is the inventory management also, when you start looking at it in these colors, you're able to see why some things sell better than others. You're able, because it's not, so this is what's also very interesting. So strains can change colors. This is why we don't pay attention to strain names. And so you can go to the same cultivator, one harvest, and get, let's say, a green. And then the next harvest from the same cultivator, same strain name, can come out a purple. And so then you're sitting there as a buyer or a retailer or something, you're going, why did Blue Dream from a cultivator sell great in Q1 and it sells terribly in Q2? Color changed, which means the experience for the consumer changed, which means they didn't get consistency and they said, nope, I don't want it, I'm going somewhere else. And that's why you also see up to 50 to 75% of consumers don't come back to the same dispensary. They shop around because they know there's no consistency. That's why we also don't see brand loyalty. And it's, again, because you're dealing with a live botanical plant. It changes. Its harvest it's how it's processed, how it's packed, how it's cured, how it's packaged, how it's stored. All of that change. All of that affects the chemistry in the plant. And if it's captured right by the right labs, and so we do pay a lot of attention to labs, pay a lot of attention to what lab practices are, but we're able to really identify those consistencies and then again share this across and start to. It's not a perfect system, and it's dynamic, and it's going to and it has to evolve as the research and science, but it's a stake in the ground for us to bring a little bit of order to the current chaos.
Yeah, and trying to have that more reliability, that trust across the spectrum, to have that repeatable experience for people who are buying. Because you're right, I think people want to have the experience and effect that they are trying to get, and I think probably strengthens between the brands, between the dispensaries, between the bud tenders. Even I think able to have that trust, I think makes a big difference. That was an interesting question. I was going to ask you in terms of the color element, because that feels very approachable, I would imagine, from people who are not normally cannabis users, who might be kind of testing it out, putting a toe in the water, trying out cannabis, whether it's from a medical perspective or I guess also technically a recreational. Well, I was going to say more of a on the lower scale of medical, sort of like very, very small aches and pains kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it mainly for, do you find people who are true deep cannabis culture users also attracted to sort of the element, or is it sort of wide capture?
It's wide capture. The
Okay.
ones that really, this is actually what's been really exciting. So because we've done this with Dr. Talleyrand, who is very well known in the California cannabis space, especially up in the Mendocino, Humboldt, Emerald Triangle area. They are actually, we have some cultivators and brands that are kind of old school legacy, and they love it because it helps protect strain diversity. Because so let me give you just an example real quick. So it helps to create this conversation where we've had a retailer most retailers are overweight purples and blues and underweight yellows and greens. Okay. And so what happens is you get yellows and greens can be harder to cultivate, specifically yellows. So what happens is you get some cultivators that really want to go, hey, I specialize in these yellows and greens, but they're speaking in a language that the retailers can't understand because they're speaking in cultivator terms, and the retailer's like, I just want to sell my product to consumers. Yep. But then when you put it in this color terms, they're like, I specialize in yellows and greens. And now we're able to go, see, you're underweight yellows and greens. Let me connect you here. So it does help actually connect the older school people. This also helps connect people like me who are educated. I'm an educated consumer, but I really don't like having to spend 30 minutes going through terpene profiles to figure out what products I like. I know that I like yellows, and I know I like greens and blues. Those are my colors. So I know immediately I'm cut down on and I don't like to shop. I'm a woman that hates shopping. I hate talking to clerks. I just want to get in, get my thing, get out.
Sure.
And so this cuts down time for me as a educated, long-time consumer patient. But then yes, it absolutely helps for the new people or the other 90% of consumers that actually, even if you've been consuming for a long time, study after study shows that 90% of consumers really don't understand what it is they're consuming, why they're consuming it. And again, this is why you see so much bouncing around and inconsistency. And so this kind of helps. It does help everyone along the supply chain, and every consumer from the very experienced to the new person.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think even experience-wise, I know you're saying you don't love to spend a lot of time shopping and everything like that, which is totally fair. I'm sure for people who do, you can within your channel or within whatever color you want, do a little browsing. So I think that can work for everyone.
Exactly.
And you try out new stuff, I think, which is great. All right. So you said, wait, greens and blues are your favorite?
Greens and blues are my favorite. So
Okay.
yeah, I like that middle. And because I have to, so I do smoke flower, and I
Mhm.
do smoke flower on a daily basis. I've been seizure free since 2016, and it helps control the pain. So, but I can't be obviously like blitzed and laid out, right? I need to make sure that I'm awake and being able to stay very much with it. And so that's another reason why this is so important, is because I don't need to be having blues and purples. I fall into the major categories. I don't need to be having blues and purples during the day. I need something that I can take very small amounts of, but fixes the pain, but allows me to stay focused, allows me to stay zoned in. That's what the greens really help do with its chemical profile. But then in the evening, when I do need to have a little bit more relaxation and a little bit more pain, that's where the blues come in. So
Yeah,
yeah.
very interesting. Have you seen any, even in the time that you've kind of been following this and creating these profiles, have you seen any shifts or changes that sort of the general consumer seems to be more interested in? It sounds like yellow underproduced, but difficult.
So actually, so this is again this is what's very interesting. So we did see out in this was out in San Francisco in our pilot. We saw that they were targeting more of an older demographic and more of a curated demographic, but they found that their yellows and greens outsold purples and blues 2-1.
Hmm.
So, and they were underweight those colors and overweight purples and blues. So when they actually balanced their inventory for a more even distribution, they saw their revenue increase 12.5% over around 6 months. And they directly attributed that to the colors and being able to know what's in it. What's also very interesting is when I've gone in and just run public, all I need is COAs. So I've been
Mhm.
able to go in and look at some of the top performing companies, public companies. And what's very interesting is you will see in some of the more, it's not a one-to-one, so I don't want to run in and say like I can tell everybody, no, but it is very interesting that some of your more top performing companies have an even distribution, and your lower performing companies have have more of a skewed distribution towards overweight being purples and blues, and heavily underweight yellows and greens. So this seems to be a consistent thing that we find from really small operators, like 1 or 2 stores, all the way to the big MSOs. We see this consistency. It's basically a snapshot into quality. I can see, because if you've got that even distribution, you're telling me that you're paying attention to the chemistry and you're paying it. And that is a high indicator that you've got good quality.
It's a positive sign. Interesting. Do you use that as well? Just when you're, trying to find a dispensary, trying to find product that you're using? Okay, that's
Oh,
fair
yeah.
enough. Right, very interesting. Yeah, because I imagine overall, I think, for a ton of reasons that we talked about, seems important from a business perspective, obviously from a consumer perspective. And I know we've been talking about sort of the medical element. I think for people who are new out there and, are struggling with something and want to try cannabis, I think making it more approachable is one element, but also probably not having a bad experience is another part of it. I've heard a ton of stories where people are kind of, even today, which it feels very different from 10 years ago, are trying to try cannabis for the first time because they feel like they really need to. And if you're trying something where you don't really know, the effects, you don't really know sometimes the dosage, even I guess ultimately for some people, that can lead you to have a bad experience. And if you have a bad experience, you might get turned off, I would imagine, from
Yes.
sort of the whole thing, which is tough. All right. Well, very interesting. I think that's great. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. I did just want to get a little bit of your high level take. Just, I know we talked
Yeah.
about the Tilted Gabbard thing. And I know you've been kind of, in the loop there. I know there's been a lot of hope and, attention paid towards the new administration in terms of taking more of a Republican angle for cannabis reform, for getting that medical access for people. Would love to get sort of just like your high level current read on kind of the temperature there.
Absolutely. It's been my opinion for a long time, and I did speak with Tulsi about this at length. Granted, it was back in 2020 when we were speaking about this on a monthly basis, or even a couple every weeks basis. But it was our opinion that there was less friction in the Republican Party to actually move cannabis reform through at the federal level, because they had been the party of prohibition. There weren't the special interests that you saw in the Democrat Party, and the special interests being, everything from safe banking to criminal justice to social justice to protecting the farm to protecting small businesses to helping out big businesses. All of that kind of was housed in the Democratic Party, whereas the Republicans just had prohibition. And so without that, just on a pure kind of, I was thinking like terms of physics, you had just less friction in the Republican Party, that should they go not in the lines of prohibition. I think they have the ability to take all of that momentum, take all of that pressure, take all of that buildup, and if it's done correctly, position it for actual federal reform. I'm a little bit of a contrarian in that I think that that we can do something more on a congressional through the direction of Donald Trump. I think that Trump can come in and say he can't, with any legal measures, deschedule it all the way or make it legalized or anything like that, but he can direct Congress and say, get me this on my desk in a time frame. And then they're pushing it, and then it's a national conversation and all of that. I think that that's possible. And I think that it's something that we can unify behind. And I'm going to really encourage the industry here that if we can focus on not just the patient consumers, and this is where I want to get into this miscategorization, is that most people, when we say patient, well, a lot of times we think of someone that's really, really sick and that needs constant medical care. And that's roughly only about 10% of cannabis consumers. And then you've got this other side that's just trying to get as high as possible. That's probably about less than 5% of cannabis consumers. So where does this other 85% fall into? They fall into a wellness category. They fall into, I'm trying to get better sleep. I'm trying to get less pain. I'm trying to relax more at the end of the day. I'm trying to have less anxiety. I'm trying to have a better appetite. These are all better quality of life. This is not a vice category, even though it can be misused. This is something in the wellness category. And I think that that's the most underplayed narrative, but is what is most representative of the average cannabis consumer. And so if we as an industry can actually unite to represent them, that 85%, I think that you have a real chance of not just turning the Republican Party into getting it for medical and that side, but for health and wellness. For health and wellness. And if you do that, you never have to fully back recreational, which is a really big stretch for Republicans. Republicans are going to have a really hard time saying we're on board with recreational marijuana. They're just, it's going to be almost impossible for them to go there. But what they can do is they can say this is for health and wellness reasons. It's the responsibility of the industry to present it that way. And and that I think is politically palatable. I think that again is representative of the vast majority of the consumers. And I think it's something that specifically Donald Trump could be receptive to, considering that he's a populist. But we've got to, and I think we've got over the next few months, 10 months before midterms, to really create this kind of movement and get a big tent instead of all of this kind of siloization that we've had, which isn't doing anyone any favors. I think we need to all come together and remember what this is about. This is about the people it's people helping people. That might sound trite, but it's really true. It's really, really true. And it's really why people are here.
No, I definitely agree. I think I mean, we were talking about it in the pre-show. I think just the amount of support that most Americans, I mean, a lot of people, but focusing it on the US, I think are supportive of having some level of access to cannabis. I think especially on the medical side, you're right, for things that are more extreme, whether it's PTSD or being in the hospital and really, needing it for that medical perspective. But I do think a lot of people can be moderate users and just find small ways to make it easier in your life. I think a lot of people who are athletes as well, I think use it for recovery. And, there are all these like little reasons. I think hopefully we do see at least the medical side come through maybe first, if that's what we kind of need to make that path towards there. But I do wonder if we also see from a state's perspective, I know states' rights feels very in line with sort of the Republican messaging. If we do see medical change happen ultimately, that it sort of destigmatizes some of cannabis further and then kind of allows for maybe the states to take it on in that way and still provide that wellness element. So I think there are a lot of ways to take it. I think we do still need those steps to get there. And hopefully, I think it does require kind of like what you're saying, that unification, kind of what I think the previous administration failed around somewhat, where there are kind of too many different angles, too many different things that are getting kind of tackled at once. I think we just need to, step forward together and kind of make progress, because I think a lot of people need it and a lot of people want it. So hopefully we get there in a way that is regulated and safe and has that testing, has that repeatable experience for people. Because I think it has been, we've talked about before, overdue, way overdue. And hopefully, I think we need to make that progress now. In terms of, out of curiosity, in terms of like speaking to that Republican messaging in terms of, I think Republicans have turned on to cannabis much more and embraced it in, like you're saying, a much bigger way. I think ultimately, what do you think the issue what do you think the issue is that would push them more towards the urgency element of getting this done? Is it the veterans? Is it something? What's your kind of take there? Just because again, I know you've been kind of in those circles.
I think it's Chelsea always told me it's middle school up there. It's not even high school.
Oh, no.
So it's politics. It's politics. It's politics. And so you're going to have an economic, or I've said this for a long time. The urgency will be creating a national conversation. If you don't get a national conversation going, where this will continue to be a low political priority, as it has been. And so I think what's really, really important is I think there's too much focus on access to new people and new patients while not focusing on the fact that 24% of Americans are using it now. They are getting it, and if we don't put regs around it, like let's just say we shut down the hemp market rather than actually regulating it, that demand doesn't go away. That demand just goes back underground, back to the illicit market, and nobody is made safer. Nobody wins. And so I think it's really trying to get that narrative across, that this is not about industry. And I think the industry really needs to, that's going to be a really hard thing for them to embrace, because everyone's human and we have our self-interest. I understand that. But it's got to be more about the people than just about the quote unquote movement or the industry, because that a lot of times gets kind of a catch-all, and then the actual people that are buying it right now, that are using it right now, they're left out for what is, kind of a proverbial to come, or a future, or a hypothetical. And I think that's been where we've really misaligned. And so I think we've got to really drive home that angle. We've also got to drive home that the rest of the world is doing it. And unless we actually really fully legalize, like, we've got to go all the way. We can't keep doing half steps. I know everyone is kind of bought into incrementalism. And if we didn't have Donald Trump in the White House, if we didn't have full of this, like with this kind of transformational air in the air, then I would say that then maybe that's all we can do. But I think this is kind of that historic time to try and do something historic. And so I know it's kind of a big shot or a long shot, I should say. But I think that if not now, you won't get it. So I do think that we could get something. I do think that we could get the incremental. I do think that that's all possible, but I don't think that's the best setup. And I don't think that's the only thing possible.
I definitely agree. I don't think it's the only thing possible. I think, from the comments, I think from the HHS stuff, I think there was a lot of comments of saying we'd like Schedule 3 and something kind of following it, which I know is that sort of incremental element. I do wonder, I feel like we're still relatively early in kind of the new term. So I wouldn't be surprised if hopefully we see something immediately. Cause like you're saying, I think you don't want to push people into kind of back alleys or kind of underground into where they're getting product that might not be good or might have stuff in it that is bad. So I think it is one of those things in my mind where it's sort of like, it is here. People are using it and want it. Like you're saying, find those regulated channels, make it easier to access it. And in my mind, I think that more comes from Schedule 3, and then hopefully we see more following. We'll see. I think everyone has different opinions, but I think everyone wants the same things, which is something for cannabis. And I think people to have access to it in a safe, regulated way, but they understand what they're getting. And I think have a good experience is ultimately, I know that sounds very like a small thing, but that is a really important thing.
It is a huge thing. 100%. And that's just to go back to, and real quick, because I know we're going to wrap up, but that is a major push behind Discover Your Color, is that many people will get a bad experience and then go away, as opposed to when we say this, you're most likely going to get this experience. But if you don't get this experience, don't worry. We can come back and give you a path through this. And I think that is really important, again, to start having more honest conversations and that starts at the dispensary level, that starts in the halls with Congress, whether at the state level or at the federal level, is having just these really honest conversations about how people are using it now, what the needs are now, and what the opportunity cost will be if we don't act now from not just from a national level, but from an international level. We'll lose out to Canada. We'll lose out to Germany. We'll lose out to even these small countries like Morocco and Macedonia, who are absolutely flooding the European markets. If the U.S. continues to get left behind, we're going to lose. We're the leader right now, but we might not be in 10 years. So that's why I'm saying that we have to have real reform now that actually pushes the needle. So that's what I think. I think that's got to be the message.
Yeah, I hope so. I do think it seems like the industry and advocates are, in more communication with this administration that they have been with previous ones. So hopefully those messages, and I think the key elements of sort of the importance of not timing, but the urgency ultimately behind it, hopefully comes across as well in terms of getting that done and accomplished. All right. Well, I feel like that's fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time. I do think it's a really important element, whether, people have been using cannabis for a long time or are trying to explore it and trying to, really find that setup that works for them. I think there's a lot of education and sort of processing through that can be really difficult. So I think it's helpful to have sort of a clearer way to look at that. So I think that's great. Would love to point people to, if they want to kind of follow the work, kind of follow Discover Your Color, where would you point them?
Honestly, go to our website. That's where you can find, like, I got a little quiz. You can take your color, and that's where we will be putting more operators that sign on and become a part of the Discover Your Color network. So that way people will be able to see where they can get colored product. Because the goal is that if you live in New York and you like greens and you go out to California, you can get a green and you're still going to get the same product regardless of the brand or the strain name. So that's kind of the goal there. If you're a consumer and you don't have it, go ask for it in your dispensary so that we can get them there. Otherwise, I'm the loudest mouth on X. That's probably the place where you'll find me the most. And I am open to DMs or emails, Livi@mytepi.com. If anyone ever wants to shoot me an email or chat about this, I'm usually responsive.
That sounds good. Well, again, really, really appreciate the time. Thanks for, I think, sharing your story and kind of the work that you're doing. I think, again, it's great to see. So really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for joining as well. Really appreciate it. And we will see you tomorrow. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.